in the marine habitat, and it falls with increase in depth. By the time you are going deeper into the water, the temperature begin to reduce, and it's getting colder and colder as you go down. Also, it contains dissolved salt. You find dissolved salt in the marine, and the salinity is high. Salinity is salt content. So you discover that the salinity, when you taste the ocean water, you discover that it's salty. Then we have high tide waves and ocean currents. When if you've been to the beach before, you understand that you see the waves is making noise. Before you know it, is high. Marine habitat is characterized by high tide waves and ocean current. The water is just moving, and sometimes you just have to run and come back to the shore before you know it again. The tide is also moving towards you. It's fun, but that's what happens. Then we have dissolved oxygen concentration is highest at the surface. The oxygen concentration is highest at the surface of the water. Then it decreases as you go in. You know, I said temperature also drops because it becomes colder as you go in. Also, dissolved oxygen concentration reduces as you go in the water. Then the major zones in marine habitats, we have the intertidal zone. Intertidal zone, we have the low tide, the high photosynthetic activity, plenty light and nutrient. The first major zone in marine habitat is the intertidal zone, and this is characterized by low tide. That is, the current of the water is not that high. Then you have high photosynthetic activity because it's at the surface of it's close to the surface. The light can easily penetrate, and photosynthetic activity can easily take place. When light is available, then photosynthesis is readily going. So that's why it has high photosynthetic activity. Then it has plenty of light, I said it earlier, and nutrients. Because photosynthesis is going on due to light, there is also nutrients in the intertidal zone. Then to the second zone, we have the littoral zone. This one is the shallow water near the coast. Then it also has abundant light for photosynthesis, just like the first one. And also it has plenty of nutrients. To the oceanic zone, it is the open sea beyond the edge of the sea. Then it has low temperature, high pressure, and chemosynthesis, that is the synthesis of chemicals. It has high pressure and synthesis of chemical. Talking about the marine life, the ocean plants and animals are divided into three. We have the plankton, the nectin, and the benthos. Plankton, nectin, and benthos. Those are the three divisions of ocean plants and animal. Now to the plankton. It's a varied collection of aquatic organisms which do not swim, or when they swim weakly. The plankton is a varied collection of aquatic organisms which do not swim, but when they swim very weakly. The plankton live in open ocean. They are carried from one place to the other by wind, waves, and ocean currents. Then the plankton are divided into two, the phytoplankton and the zooplankton. That is the plant-like plankton, that's why you have phytoplankton. Then the animal-like plankton, that's the zooplankton. Example of phytoplankton, you have the diatoms and the single-celled algae. While the zooplankton, you have the protozoans and the crustaceans. Those are examples of zooplankton. The next group in the marine life, we have the nectin. Nectin are pelagic organisms. That is, they live near the surface of the ocean, and they swim and float freely in the sea. They are free to swim around. By feeding, they filter food from water. They filter their food from water and also eat other plants and animals. So they are heterotrophic in their feeding. They feed on by filtering water, and they also eat other plants and animals. Example of organisms that are called nectin, we have the reptiles, the sea turtle, sea snakes, your crab, whales, and shrimps. So those are examples of nectin. Then to the third group, we have the benthos. The benthos are organisms that live at the bottom of the sea or the lake. They don't have enough light. They are unlike the other organisms. So you know that their photosynthetic activity will be very low. Then they are sessile, that is, they are attached to substrate. They don't really move because they are dead. Then they are growing animals. They go into the soil, really into the soil. Examples, we have the seaweed, the growing animals. They go down into the water because they are at the bottom of the sea. So they find their food in the soil, not like unlike those that filter the water to take their food. For these animals that are marine in nature, there are things or there are structures that they have which help them to adapt to their environment. You know, when we mentioned the characteristics of living things, I said adaptation is one of the characteristics of living thing. Ability of that living thing to adapt to its environment, to the changes and everything that occur. How the animal can survive. It's a critical characteristics of living things. So how do plants in the marine habitat adapt to this kind of environment? Number one, they have air bladder for floating, e.g. seaweed. So they have air bladder with which they can float. Also, they have mucilaginous cover, which minimizes problems of desiccation during low tide. They don't have dry skin because of the mucilaginous cover that they have. Even when the tide is low, they can still survive. Also, they have highly photosynthetic chloroplast and small size with large surface area for floating. For instance, in the algae is a good example of the plants that have these characteristics of highly photosynthetic chloroplast, so they can easily undergo photosynthesis. Then they have small size to large surface area for floating. They have a small size so that they can easily float. They are not massive. Another adaptive feature is that they have thick reduced leaf for water conservation. They conserve water, so their leaves are thick. Also, they have floating devices. They are false roots. Those are what we call rhizoid for attachment to the rock planting. They can get themselves attached to a particular rock. So an example of such is the planting. We talked about planting before. So they have floating devices. They have false roots in the water for attachment to rocks. Now to the adaptive features of animals in the marine habitat. Number one, they have gills and spongy structure that act as their lungs for respiration. You know, they cannot just behave like land animals, so they have spongy structure and gills which helps them in respiration, and that is tadpoles. Then periwinkles have lungs for breathing, and they have a foot for attachment. They can easily attach to a rod. Then barnacles have cilia for feeding, and they have their shell that prevents them from drying out. That's desiccation. So they can always stay in the shell, and the hardship in the weather condition does not affect them. Another thing that the annelids do is that their body fluid is isotonic. I mentioned isotonic when we were talking about osmosis, that is balanced with the seawater. The concentration of their body and that of the seawater is the same. So there is no need for movement of materials in and out, so that there is no need for osmoregulation. That is why the annelids have their body concentration being isotonic, that is equal with that of the water concentration. The shrimps Shrimps have powerful claws for seizing their prey. You know, when you see shrimp, you really know that they have that powerful claws for seizing their prey. Also, cartilaginous fishes retain little area in their blood to cope with salinity. You know, we talked about it the other time that there is high salt content in this water. There is salt. So for the fishes to survive that salt, they retain a little area in their blood so that they will be able to cope with salinity. Then bony fishes possess small salt secreting glands in their gills for retaining salt balance. Bony fishes also retain salt balance by secreting a salt gland in their gill. So those are the ways these animals cope with the marine habitat. Now we talk about the next habitat, which is the estuarine habitat. The characteristics of the estuarine habitat include wide mouth of a river where tidal action brings about mixing of salt and fresh water to establish brackish condition. There is a wide mouth